Before Bruce Lee became the global icon, the dragon of martial arts, and the father of modern mixed martial arts, he was a student, a sponge soaking up the knowledge of those who came before him. His legacy is etched into pop culture and combat history, but what many people don't realize is that Bruce Lee's greatness wasn't born in a vacuum. He was molded by legends, real-life martial arts masters whose influence helped shape his philosophy, sharpen his technique, and inspire his relentless pursuit of perfection. To understand Bruce Lee fully, we need to trace his steps back before the fame, before Hollywood, before the one-inch punch amazed the world. We need to look at the men who lit the fire in him. The masters he trained under, studied from, or simply admired from afar. These were not ordinary men. These were warriors, philosophers, pioneers, and artists who laid the foundations for Bruce to build his revolutionary vision upon. Bruce was born in San Francisco in 1940 but raised in Hong Kong, where martial arts were more than just a practice, they were culture, honor, identity. Hong Kong in the 1950s was a place of vibrant traditions and intense street rivalries. Young boys were drawn to Kung Fu not just for discipline, but for survival. And Bruce, despite his charisma and charm, was a street fighter at heart. He was constantly testing himself. Constantly looking for an edge. That hunger would lead him to one man who would change the trajectory of his life forever, his first true master, Ip Man. Ip Man wasn't just a Wing Chun teacher, he was a legend in the making himself. He was a quiet, humble figure, known not for flashy moves but for razor-sharp precision and calm under pressure. Wing Chun, the style Ip Man taught, wasn't designed to look beautiful. It was designed to work fast, close quarters, and efficient. When Bruce came under Ip Man's wing, he was already quick and scrappy, but what he lacked was discipline and focus. Ip Man gave him that. He taught Bruce how to relax into his movements, how to stay rooted while being fluid, how to use his opponent's force against them. But Bruce's journey with Ip Man wasn't smooth. At first, many of Ip Man's senior students didn't want to train with Bruce. Because Bruce was part European, his mother's ancestry was Eurasian, there was prejudice. Many Kung Fu schools at the time didn't want to teach non-Chinese students. It was an old mindset, but one that Bruce would spend his entire life breaking. He fought not just against bodies, but against barriers. Still, Ip Man saw promise in the young Lee. He occasionally gave him private lessons, and Bruce devoured everything like a starving wolf. He would practice late into the night, punching wooden dummies until his knuckles bled. He mimicked Ip Man's movements, shadowboxed through the halls of his home, and sparred with anyone who would accept the challenge. Wing Chun taught him economy, every movement had a purpose. It also taught him sensitivity, using touch and feel to read an opponent rather than brute force. But Bruce wasn't satisfied with just one style. He never would be. Even as a teenager, he began studying other systems. He would sneak into other schools, observe different masters, and ask endless questions. His hunger for knowledge became almost obsessive. He read books, watched matches, and even studied Western boxing techniques. The world of martial arts was like a massive puzzle to him, and he was determined to put it all together. One of the first influences outside of Ip Man was Leung Shun, one of Ip Man's earliest and most senior students. While Leung didn't directly teach Bruce, his presence was strong. Bruce often observed how Leung moved, his stance, his control, his ability to remain calm in chaos. Leung embodied the essence of Wing Chun's philosophy, and Bruce respected that deeply. Another key figure was Wang Shun Leung, a close student of Ip Man who became one of Bruce's informal mentors. Wang was a street fighting expert, known for testing Wing Chun in real-world scenarios. He wasn't about theory, he was about application. He engaged in Beima matches, unsanctioned fights between practitioners of different styles. Bruce looked up to Wang, not just as a fighter, but as a living example of how Wing Chun could dominate in the streets. Wang took Bruce under his wing in ways that man couldn't always do. He sparred with Bruce, challenged him, and corrected his flaws. Bruce began to develop a deeper understanding of timing, range, and explosive counterattacks. These weren't flashy movie moves, these were practical, fight-tested techniques. Wang's mentorship reinforced Bruce's belief that real martial arts weren't about forms or traditions, they were about truth. That concept ***, the search for martial truth ***, would later become the cornerstone of Bruce Lee's own philosophy, Jeet Kune Do. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. At this point, Bruce was still in his teens, still figuring things out. Still a raw ball of energy. But his restlessness was growing. When Bruce moved to the United States in 1959, he brought with him all the fire of Hong Kong streets. He started teaching Wing Chun-style techniques to Americans, something that was almost unheard of at the time. Traditional martial arts were seen as secretive, passed down only through heritage. Bruce shattered that wall. He opened his doors to everyone, white, black, Asian, Latino, men and women. To him, martial arts had no race. No borders. Just truth. In Seattle, he founded his first martial arts school and began attracting a loyal group of students. Among them was Jesse Glover, Bruce's first student in America and a judo practitioner. Jesse helped Bruce understand grappling and throws, areas Wing Chun didn't heavily emphasize. In exchange, Bruce taught Jesse the explosive speed and intercepting punches Wing Chun was known for. This exchange of knowledge became a pattern in Bruce's life. He didn't see styles, he saw tools. He began assembling his own toolkit. Over time, Bruce added influences from Western boxing, particularly from greats like Muhammad Ali. He admired Ali's footwork, his rhythm, his ability to move in and out with grace. Bruce would watch Ali's fights obsessively, mimicking his bounces and shuffles. He realized that no one had a monopoly on martial effectiveness. That realization only deepened when he began studying fencing techniques. Yes, fencing. From fencing, he took the idea of timing, of feints, of intercepting strikes mid-motion. This would become one of the key principles of Jeet Kune Do ***, the way of the intercepting fist. By the mid-60s, Bruce was no longer just a student. He was becoming a philosopher, a creator, a disruptor. But the seeds of that transformation, the ones that would change martial arts forever, were planted by the real-life masters who shaped him, Ip Man, Wang Shanliang, and others whose legacies live through him. In the next part, we'll explore how Bruce's journey continued in America, how he clashed with tradition, challenged the norms, and sought wisdom from other giants of combat like Ed Parker and Gene LeBell. Because Bruce Lee didn't just train, he absorbed. And in doing so, he transformed himself from a kung fu prodigy into a warrior of the world. When Bruce Lee arrived in the United States, he was still just a teenager, but not just any teenager. He already had a mind buzzing with ideas and fists faster than most could see. While others his age were figuring out careers or relationships, Bruce was figuring out how to revolutionize martial arts. But in this new land, he was unknown, untested. That didn't last long. Settling first in Seattle, Bruce began teaching martial arts informally to students at the University of Washington, where he also studied philosophy. This is where his deep interest in martial arts as a mental and spiritual practice grew even further. His students didn't just learn how to punch or kick, they learned why they were doing it. For Bruce, philosophy and combat were two sides of the same coin. And now, he had a stage to develop both. One of the first and most significant figures Bruce met in America was Jesse Glover, a man with a judo background and a former student of martial arts pioneer Ed, the father of American Kenpo Parker. Jesse became Bruce's first student and closest friend in the early days. Their training sessions were brutal but full of exchange. Bruce gave Jesse explosive Wing Chun skills, while Jesse introduced Bruce to grappling, breakfalls, and leverage. This early blending of arts signaled Bruce's growing belief that no style was complete on its own. In a time where martial artists clung to tradition and hierarchy, Bruce saw truth as the ultimate goal. If it worked in combat, it was useful. If it didn't, it was discarded. Simple. Soon, Bruce's reputation began to spread, not just as a skilled fighter, but as a teacher who could explain combat like a scientist. That clarity and charisma drew in more students, including people from different disciplines. Karateka, boxers, wrestlers, they all came to test or learn from this wiry young man with lightning reflexes and a razor-sharp mind. Then came Ed Parker, one of the most influential martial artists in the U.S. at the time. Parker was already building a name as a promoter of American Kenpo and organized the prestigious Long Beach International Karate Championships. This would become one of the most pivotal turning points in Bruce's life. In 1964, Ed Parker invited Bruce to demonstrate his skills at the Long Beach event. Bruce was relatively unknown to the wider martial arts community, but that demonstration changed everything. In front of a stunned audience, Bruce showcased speed, power, and technique like no one had ever seen. His famous one-inch punch, which sent a grown man flying backward with barely a twitch, became legend overnight. But beyond the punch, it was his ideas that shocked people. Bruce told the audience that traditional martial arts were too rigid, too focused on rituals, and not enough on results. That martial artists needed to evolve or fade away. It was radical, it was bold, and it ticked a lot of people off. But it also opened doors. At Long Beach, Bruce met Gene LeBell, a professional wrestler and judo champion known as Judo Gene. Gene was the real deal, a grappler who had trained in Japan and was considered one of the toughest men alive. Bruce, who had mostly trained in striking arts, was fascinated by LeBell's grappling abilities. The two sparred, joked, and shared knowledge. LeBell would later say Bruce was one of the fastest strikers he'd ever seen. In turn, Bruce began to integrate throws, locks, and submissions into his own training. This relationship exposed Bruce to a truth many martial artists ignored: real fights often end up on the ground. Bruce didn't just observe that truth, he absorbed it. Then came James Yim Lee, another important figure in Bruce's journey. James was a fellow martial artist, a bodybuilder, and co-author of some of Bruce's earliest writings. Together, they co-founded the Oakland branch of Bruce's martial arts school, and James became a trusted friend and collaborator. Through James, Bruce's ideas reached a broader audience through published articles and demonstrations. But Bruce's life in Oakland also brought a different kind of confrontation. One that would define his evolution as a martial artist. A challenge came from the Chinese martial arts community. Many traditionalists were furious that Bruce was teaching Kung Fu to non-Chinese students. They believed martial arts should be preserved within Chinese circles. One day, a group approached Bruce with an ultimatum: stop teaching outsiders, or fight. Bruce chose to fight. The match was set in secret, a closed-door duel between Bruce Lee and Wong Jack Man, a respected practitioner of traditional Kung Fu. The details of the fight remain debated. Some say it lasted 3 minutes, others say 20. But one thing is clear: Bruce won. He overwhelmed Wong with relentless aggression. But Bruce wasn't satisfied. Despite the victory, he felt the fight had taken too long. That made him question his own method. It was a turning point. Bruce realized that even Wing Chun, even the teachings of Ip Man and Wang Shanliang, had limitations. He needed to go beyond systems. Beyond labels. He needed a new approach, one that wasn't bound by tradition. This was the beginning of Jeet Kune Do. He began stripping away the unnecessary. He started training like an athlete, running, lifting weights, doing interval training. He began watching films of boxers and fencers. He studied psychology, strategy, biomechanics. His garage became a laboratory, and every student who walked in became part of an experiment. Bruce also began making friends in Hollywood. Through his growing fame, he connected with actor Steve McQueen, who would become one of his students and closest friends. McQueen wasn't just a celebrity, he was a former Marine, a racer, and someone who respected Bruce as an equal. Their bond would further elevate Bruce's visibility in both martial arts and entertainment. And through these new relationships, Bruce began spreading his vision, a martial art that was alive, dynamic, and personalized. Not a fixed style, but a constantly evolving method. He would say, absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. The martial arts masters who shaped Bruce Lee, Ip Man, Wang Shanliang, Gene LeBell, Ed Parker, Jesse Glover, they each gave him a piece of the puzzle. But Bruce didn't just replicate them. He built upon them. He turned their wisdom into fuel. Into fire. And that fire was about to light the world on fire. In the next part, we'll explore how Bruce's training evolved into Jeet Kune Do, how his friendships with fellow martial artists like Dan Inosanto expanded his world, and how his relentless experimentation took martial arts to places it had never gone before. By the late 1960s, Bruce Lee was no longer just a teacher, he was a force of nature. His mind was constantly in motion, questioning everything, seeking clarity in the chaos of combat. He believed that truth in martial arts could not be confined to any single tradition. And so he began to fully articulate and live his philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. This wasn't just another martial art. It wasn't a new style. In fact, Bruce was quick to say that Jeet Kune Do was not a style at all. It was a concept, a way of thinking, a method of freedom. And one of the most important figures who helped him develop and spread that method was Dan Inosanto. Dan was a martial artist with a background in Filipino arts like eskrima and arnis. When he began training with Bruce, he quickly became not just a student, but a collaborator. Dan brought weapons training, footwork drills, and a warrior's discipline to the mix. In return, Bruce gave Dan his blueprint for motion interception, efficiency, fluidity. The two bonded deeply, and Dan would later become one of Bruce's most trusted instructors. With Dan by his side, Bruce tested new ideas constantly. He blended boxing jabs with Wing Chun's centerline theory. He mixed Muay Thai elbows with fencing's distance control. He drilled judo throws and savate kicks. Everything was on the table. If it worked, it stayed. This approach wasn't just revolutionary, it was controversial. Traditionalists were horrified. In their eyes, Bruce was disrespecting the lineage, disregarding history. But Bruce didn't see it that way at all. To him, tradition was the prison of truth if it refused to evolve. He respected the past, but he refused to be bound by it. He once said, "To hell with circumstances, I create opportunities." And he lived by that. He didn't wait for acceptance. He didn't wait for permission. He moved forward fast, fierce, unapologetic. Physically, Bruce transformed himself into a machine. His workouts were brutal, methodical, and ahead of their time. He trained like a modern-day MMA fighter before MMA even existed. He did isometrics, heavy bag work, speed drills, coordination games. His diet was clean, his sleep strict, and his mind constantly learning. One of his closest training partners during this time was Taiki Kimura, a Japanese-American who became one of the first certified instructors in Jeet Kune Do. Taiki was older than Bruce and carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived through the harshest times: internment camps, racism, loss. Bruce respected that, and their bond was built not just on training, but on shared humanity. Taiki learned from Bruce, but he also taught Bruce about humility, endurance, and quiet strength. Their sessions were about more than just physical movement, they were about connection. And then came Chuck Norris. Yes, that Chuck Norris. At the time, Chuck was a karate champion and an emerging action star. Bruce and Chuck respected each other deeply, and while their styles were different, their mutual obsession with improvement bonded them. The most famous result of their relationship was, of course, their iconic fight scene in Way of the Dragon. But behind the scenes, Bruce learned from Chuck's control, power, and tournament experience. In turn, Chuck admired Bruce's speed, strategy, and creativity. Bruce was now surrounded by a network of warriors, each with unique skills, and he drew from all of them. But Bruce also began to face pain, physical, emotional, and mental. Injuries from intense training sessions began to pile up. The pressure of being an icon, a husband, a father, and a revolutionary weighed on him. But through it all, he kept pushing. Because to Bruce, every moment was a chance to improve. And at the heart of it all, the lessons of those early masters still burned brightly. Ip Man's calm. Wang Shunlian's raw power. Gene LaBelle's grip strength. Jesse Glover's heart. Ed Parker's showmanship. Dan Inosanto's versatility. They were all inside him, echoing through his fists. In the next part, we'll explore how Bruce began shaping the world through film, how his choreography became an extension of his philosophy, and how his encounters with other martial arts legends kept refining his path to greatness. As Bruce Lee's martial arts philosophy deepened, so did his presence in popular culture. He wasn't just training behind closed doors anymore, he was stepping in front of the camera, where his every movement would reach millions. What most people didn't realize was that every choreographed fight scene, every slow-motion kick, every blink and you'll miss it counter in Bruce's films was a message, a philosophy, expressed through motion. To Bruce, cinema wasn't just entertainment. It was a platform. A way to spread martial arts to people who had never set foot in a dojo. And so he choreographed his fights not to dazzle, but to educate. If you watch closely, you'll see Wing Chun, Western boxing, fencing, judo, taekwondo, and Filipino eskrima all woven together with surgical precision. And at the core of that fusion was Bruce's endless curiosity. He wasn't afraid to learn from anyone. Whether it was a black belt or a bouncer, a champion or a street brawler, if they had something to teach, Bruce would listen. That mindset brought him into contact with more masters. One of the most interesting was Joe Louis, one of the earliest American kickboxing champions. Joe was big, powerful, and aggressive, a stark contrast to Bruce's lithe, explosive style. They sparred, they shared notes, and Bruce taught Joe the principles of interception and explosive entry. In return, Bruce gained deeper insight into full contact strategy, timing, and feints. Joe once said Bruce hit harder than anyone he'd ever fought, pound for pound. Then there was Bob Wall, another black belt and tournament fighter, who starred alongside Bruce in Enter the Dragon. Their on-screen fights were intense, but their training off-screen was even more valuable. Bruce was relentless in drilling techniques, breaking them down, refining, reshaping. He wasn't just teaching actors how to fight, he was training fighters how to move like thinkers. But perhaps the most significant evolution in Bruce's martial arts career came with his fight scenes becoming philosophy in motion. The way he fought on screen was exactly how he fought in real life, direct, precise, and stripped of waste. Every block, every strike, every step was rooted in the idea that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Even the iconic yellow tracksuit in Game of Death wasn't just a costume. It was a symbol. Yellow and black, clean lines, no frills. Just like Jeet Kune Do. Just like Bruce. And then came Enter the Dragon, his first big Hollywood-backed film. It was more than just a martial arts movie. It was a declaration. A Chinese-American man, speaking fluent English, acting as the lead hero in a Hollywood action film, this was revolutionary. But Bruce made sure the martial arts remained pure. Real techniques. Real strategy. Real philosophy. Behind the scenes, Bruce was still training with the same intensity. Still sharpening his craft. Still seeking wisdom. And as his fame grew, so did the circle of people wanting to learn from him. That included more martial arts champions, boxers, wrestlers, and even dancers. Yes, dancers. Bruce deeply admired James Coburn, an actor and student of his, who brought rhythm and style to every move. Bruce would often say, martial arts is like dancing, except there's no music and someone's trying to kill you. He believed rhythm was critical. That a fighter needed to understand timing, cadence, acceleration, and breaks just like a musician or a dancer. Bruce would even borrow from cha-cha, a dance he once competed in as a teenager in Hong Kong. He used its principles of footwork, pivoting, and angles to enhance his movement in fights. He found art in motion. Grace in violence. And yet, Bruce never stopped challenging himself. He would invite masters of other styles to spar, to discuss, to debate. Not out of arrogance, but out of respect. He knew that the only way to grow was to test. To be tested. Through this period, his training with Dan Inosanto continued to evolve. Dan introduced him to the Filipino concept of flow, the ability to move between weapons and empty hands, between ranges and rhythms. Bruce took that concept and embedded it deep into Jeet Kune Do. He began teaching students to flow not just with their body, but with their mind. If a punch was blocked, flow into a trap. If a trap failed, flow into a throw. If that failed, flow into the next moment. Never stop. Never freeze. That was the idea. And it wasn't just martial arts, it was life. Bruce applied these principles to everything: parenting, filmmaking, business, personal relationships. He believed rigidity was death. Movement was life. And as his fame soared, Bruce never forgot the lessons of Ip Man, the quiet master who taught him discipline. Or Wang Shunliang, who taught him how to pressure test techniques. Or Jean Labelle, who showed him the power of leverage and grappling. These weren't memories, they were pillars, holding up everything Bruce created. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at Bruce's physical transformation, how he trained, how he pushed his body to superhuman levels, and how martial artists from various disciplines shaped that process. You'll see how Bruce didn't just aim to fight well, he aimed to live well. And for him, training was the path to truth. If you ever saw Bruce Lee shirtless, and let's be honest, it's hard to forget, you probably noticed the insane definition in his body. Lean muscle, razor-sharp abs, vascular arms. He didn't just look strong. He was strong. But here's the thing, Bruce didn't build his body for looks. He built it for function. Bruce treated his body like a weapon. Every day, he trained it to be faster, lighter, more explosive. He believed that to fight at the highest level, the body had to be in perfect balance with the mind. That meant intense discipline, physically, mentally, spiritually. So where did he get these ideas? From everywhere. One of his influences in physical development was bodybuilder and martial artist Tommy Gong, who helped Bruce understand hypertrophy and muscular balance. Bruce didn't want bulk, he wanted speed. And that meant lean muscle mass with maximal contraction power. He followed a strict routine, weight training in the morning, martial arts in the afternoon, running in the evening, followed by flexibility drills and meditation. Bruce adopted techniques from Western sports science at a time when most martial artists still believed in ancient training methods. He used electrical muscle stimulation, isometrics, plyometrics, and interval training. He studied physiology, kinesiology, and nutrition with the same intensity he studied combat. His cardio regimen? Brutal. He would run several miles a day, followed by sprints. Then shadowboxing with light dumbbells. Then punching drills. Then kicks on the heavy bag. Each movement was refined. Corrected. Then repeated 1,000 times. And he trained his mind just as hard. He read philosophy, from Lao Tzu and Krishnamurti to Nietzsche and Alan Watts. He didn't see martial arts as violence, he saw it as a form of self-discovery. His notebooks are filled with reflections like, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless like water. These weren't just quotes, they were training principles. He wanted his students to think while they moved. To feel their bodies, not just perform drills.